Konnichiwa no minasama, anata wa genki desu ka? Osuki no biohazard no shoujo Sabrina desu. Junbei wa ii desu ka? Hey everyone, how's it going? It's your favorite Resident Evil girl, Sabrina here. And today we're going to be reading The Umbrella Conspiracy by S.D. Perry. This is going to be a little bit of a change up from my usual streams. Normally I like strictly play games and like every once in a while I have like a holiday special where like I do a bunch of like other random stuff and kind of chat with you guys. Today is going to be a slightly different variation on that, and we're going to be reading a book. Like it's going to be like a live reading, and I'm going to be reading the comments at the end of every chapter. So if you have a comment and I didn't read it right away, just wait till I get to the end of the chapter, and that's when I'll do it. So just wanted to let you guys know, kind of give you a layout of how it's gonna go, and make sure we're all good. Hello, Tom. How's it going? Welcome to stream. Pleasure to see you as always. Are you excited? This is it's gonna be a little different. I think so. Well, I'm gonna start sending out my links while we're waiting for some more people to show up. And then, depending on... Actually, let me look real quick. I can't do it on there. Okay. Never mind. I was just checking something real quick. Alright, I'm gonna send out my links though. Yeah, you're pleasantly surprised. Interesting surprise. I told you guys it's gonna be a surprise. You like, and on top of that, I never even talked to you guys about reading this book. I only mentioned the Code Veronica one. So it was like, I tried to come completely out of left field with this. And just completely 180. Okay. Will the RE5 menu music be playing too? Just wait, okay? Just give me 1 second. No. I feel like the RE5 music wouldn't be good reading music though, would it? Like, what do you guys think? I feel like the drums would be too like distracting from the reading. Cause like you'll be sitting there listening to me read what's going on, you know, it starts to get to like a little bit of a like longer like section, you know, going a little bit. The like you hear the drums slowly start fading in, and then you start like you're like, "Whoa, I like that," and you keep listening a little bit, and and then it's at that point you realize you haven't heard the last 8 sentences because you're just jamming to the RE5 library music. So like, I don't know. I just feel like it'd be too powerful. That's all I gotta say. All right. Let me continue this. Okay. I think that is everything. I'm done with that. All right. Well, we are like ready to get started. So we jump right into it. And if you guys would follow me over to the next scene. All right. All right. So we're gonna start at the prologue, and it looks like it is a series of like news reports about everything that's been going on. So I think that's a really solid start. There was like a little like excerpt above this that was like there's like a talking about Wesker and them like in the forest, but I felt like it would be too out of place to read that first, so I'm just starting at the prologue. Latham Weekly, June 2nd, 1988. Bizarre homicide in Raccoon City. Anna Mitaki, 42 years old, was found mutilated at late yesterday in an abandoned area not far from her home in northwest Raccoon City. This incident marked her as the fourth victim of cannibalism after the case of the last one near the Victory Lake district by the prior month. Consistent with the coroner reports of other victims, Mitaki's corpse showed the sign of having been partially eaten, and the bite pattern possibly formed by human jaws. Shortly after the discovery of Miss Mitaki's corpse by two joggers at approximately 9 o'clock last night, Chief Irons briefly stated that the RPD is working hard to apprehend the perpetrator, and he had consulted with the city officials to improve Raccoon City's protection. In addition to killing spree of cannibalism, 3 others have died under animal attacks in Raccoon Forest for the past several weeks, bringing the total of mysterious deaths up to 7 till date. Raccoon Times, June 22nd, 1988. Horror in Raccoon, increase in casualties. Raccoon City, the bodies of a young couple were found early Sunday morning in Victory Park. Deanne Rush and Christopher Smith were reported as missing by their parents by the late Saturday night and later were discovered by police officers on the west bank of Victory Lake at precisely 2 a.m. The young couple's death recorded them as the 8th and 9th victims of the cannibalism case that had terrorized the city since mid-May of this year. Although no official statement released by the police department, witnesses have confirmed that both youths suffered similar wounds with the previous victims. Whether the attackers were human or animal, it has yet to be announced. According to friends of the couple, the two had talked about tracking down the rumored wild dogs that had been spotting in the dense forest by the park. They planned to violate the city's curfew and went to search for the alleged nocturnal creatures. Mayor Harris has scheduled a press conference for this afternoon and was expected to take action regarding the current crisis, calling for stricter enforcement of the curfew. Cityside, July 21st, 1998. STARS Special Tactics and Rescue Squad sent to save Raccoon City. Raccoon City. With the reported disappearance of 3 hikers in Raccoon Forest earlier this week, city officials have finally called for a roadblock on rural Route 6 at the foothills of the Arklay Mountains. Police Chief Brian Irons announced that STARS would participate in the search of the missing hikers and cooperated with the RPD to solve the murders and missing case terrorizing our city. Chief Irons, as the former member of STARS himself, said today in an exclusive Cityside telephone interview that it is the time to employ the talents of these dedicated men and women toward the safety of this city. We had 9 brutal murders and at least 5 disappearances within less than 2 months, and all of these events took place in nearby Raccoon Forest. This leads us to believe that the perpetrators of the crimes may hide somewhere in the Victory Lake district, and STARS have the experience to find them. When asked why not assign STARS early, Chief Irons said that they have been assisting the RPD in the first place, and they would be a welcome addition to the task force currently working on the solved case full-time. Founded in New York in 1967, the privately funded STARS was originally created as a measure against cult-related terrorism by a group of retired military officials and ex-field operatives from both CIA and FBI. Under the guidance of former NSDA, National Security and Defense Agency Director Marco Palmieri, the group rapidly expanded its service to include everything from hostage negotiation to code-breaking riot control. Working with local police agencies, each branch office of the STARS is designed to work as a complete unit by itself. STARS set up its Raccoon City branch through the fundraising efforts of several local businesses in 1972 and is currently led by Captain Albert Wesker, promoted to the position less than 6 months ago. Alright. And once again, as I said, for anyone that wasn't here in the beginning, due to the nature of this stream, I am going to be reading comments at the end of every chapter. So, I just want to let you guys know. Hey Ben, how's it going? Welcome to stream. Pleasure to see you as always. Sabrini, hey Matt, how's it going? Welcome to stream. Pleasure to see you as well. She's reading today. It's pretty cool ASMR, I think. I think so too. I mean, it's definitely quite a change up from the usual gameplay. And I feel like after how intense RE6 was yesterday, and honestly the past couple games I've been playing have been pretty action packed, intense, always stuff happening, and I felt like maybe taking a day to just read and relax would be the best way to go. So that's what we're going to be doing today. I know I'm definitely excited. This book is very dear to my heart. I have read it a bajillion times. It is amazing. For anyone that hasn't read it,
I highly recommend giving it a read. It's a great book. Honestly, all of these S.D. Perry novels are amazing. So, Chapter 2, Chapter 1. Jill Valentine was late for the briefing, yet she somehow managed to drop her keys into her coffee on the way out of her room. There was a muted ting as they hit the bottom. Jill paused mid-stride, staring in disbelief at the steaming ceramic mug. Then the thick stack of files in the other arm slid onto the floor. Paper clips and sticky notes all over the tan carpeting. Damn, she cursed while checking on her watch. Swiftly goes back towards her kitchen. Wesker had called the meeting for 1900 sharp, and she only had 9 minutes left to make the 10-minute drive, find the parking spot, and get her ass into the chair. This was the first full disclosure meeting since Stars had gotten the case. Hell, it was her first real meeting. And of course, she was going to be late. Probably my first time to give a rat's ass about being on time, and I fall apart by the door, she muttered gloomily as she strode to the sink, feeling tense and angry for not getting ready earlier. It was the goddamn case's fault. She had picked up her copies of the ME files right after breakfast and spent all day digging through the reports, searching for the missing clues, only to feel more frustrated by the end since she discovered nothing new. She dumped the coffee and picked the warm, wet keys, wiping them on her jeans before running back to the front door, crouches to gather the files. Jill suddenly stopped. A glossy color photo caught her attention on the above of all files. Oh, girls. She picked it up gently, knowing she didn't have the time, and yet unable to glance away from the blood-splattered faces. Jill felt the knots of tension that had been building all day intensify, and she could do is to take a breath while staring at the crime scene photo. Becky and Priscilla McGee, 9 and 7 years old. She had flipped past it earlier, telling herself that she had nothing to see in it. But it isn't true, is it? You can keep pretending, or you can admit it. Everything's different now. It has been different since the day they died. When Jill first moved to Raccoon, she had been under lots of stress, feeling uncertain about the transfer, not even sure if she actually wanted to be a part of Stars. She was good at her job, but had only taken it because of Dick. After the indictment, she had started to pressure her into get another line of work. It had taken a while, but her father persistently told her again and again that one Valentine in jail was enough. He even admitted that he had raised her in the wrong way. With her training and background, there weren't a whole lot of options but Stars. At least, she appreciates her skills and disregards how she had gotten them. The pay was decent, and there was an element of the risk she had grown to enjoy. In retrospect, the career change had been surprisingly easy. It made Dick happy and gave her the chance to see how the other half lived. Still, the transfer had made harder on her than she had realized. For the first time since Dick had gone inside, she truly felt alone in working for the law, as if starts to seem like a joke. The daughter of Dick Valentine, working for truth, justice, and the American way. Her promotion to the Alphas, a nice little house in the suburbs. It was crazy. She had been giving serious thought to just blowing out of town, giving up all this, and going back to what she had been before. Until two little girls who lived across the street showed up on her doorstep and asked her with wide, tear-stained eyes if she was a cop. Their parents at work and they couldn't find their dog. Becky in her green school shoes, little Pris in her overalls, both sniffling and shy. Their dog had been wandering through a garden only a few blocks away, no sweat. She had made 2 new friends as easy as that. The sisters had promptly adopted Jill, showing up after school to bring her messy bunches of flowers, playing in her yard on weekends, singing her endless songs they learned from the movies and cartoons. It's not that the girls had magically taken away her loneliness and idea, but somehow she was no longer eager to move away. For the first time in her 23 years, Jill started to feel like she was part of the community she had lived and worked. The change was very subtle and gradual that she barely noticed them. 6 weeks ago, Becky and Pris wandered away from their family picnic, and they had become the first 2 victims of the psychopath that had terrorized the isolated city. Her hand trembled, sparing her at nothing. Becky laid on her back, staring blindly at the sky as her mouth gaped, a ragged hole in her belly. Pris sprawled next to her, arms outstretched, chunks of flesh ripped savagely from slender limbs. Both had been eviscerated, dying of massive trauma before they had bled out. Their scream heard by no one. Enough! Jill put down the photo. They are gone, but I can finally do something about it. Then she gathered the papers back into their folder. She stepped outside in the early evening, taking a deep breath. The scent of the freshly cut grass was heavy in the sun-warmed air. A dog barked happily amidst the shouts of children down the street. Jill hurried to the small, dented, gray hatchback parked by the front walk, forcing herself not to look at the silent McGee house. She started the car, pulled away from the curb, drives through the wide suburban streets of her neighborhood, pushing the speed limit while carefully watch for kids and pets. There weren't many around because of the incidents. The little hatchback shuddered as she accelerated up the ramp to Highway 202, the warm, dry air whipping her long hair back from her face. It felt good, like waking up from a bad dream. She sped through the sun-dappled evening, the shadows of trees growing long across the road. Whether it was fate or just the luck of the draw, her life had been touched by what was happening in Raccoon City. She couldn't keep pretending that she's just some jaded ex-thief trying to stay out of jail, trying to toe the line to make her father happy, or Stars was just another job. It mattered now. It mattered to her that those children were dead and the killers were still on the loose. The victim files next to her fluttered slightly, the top folder caught by the wind. 9 restless spirits, perhaps. Becky and Priscilla McGee was among them. Jill rested her right hand on the ruffled sheet, gently stilling it, and she swore to herself that no matter what it took, she was going to find out who was responsible. Whatever she had been before, whatever she would be in the future, she had changed and wouldn't rest until these murders held accountable for their actions. "Sup, Chris?" Chris Redfield turned away from the soda machine, sees Forrest Speyer strode down the empty hall with a wide grin on his tanned and boyish face. He was actually a few years older than Chris, but looked like a rebellious teenager. Long hair, studded jean jacket, a tattoo of a skull smoking a cigarette on his left shoulder. The man was also an excellent mechanic, and one of the best shots Chris had ever seen in action. "Hey, Forrest, what's up?" Chris scooped up a can of club soda from the machine's dispenser and glanced at his watch. Still a couple of minutes left before the meeting. Smiling tiredly as Forrest stopped in front of him, his blue eyes gleaming, Forrest was carrying an armful of equipment, vest, utility belt, and shoulder pack. Wesker gave Marini the go-ahead to start the search. "Bravo's team going in," Forrest excitedly said. His Alabama slang slowed his words to a stereotypical drawl. He dropped his stuff on one of the visitors' chairs, still grinning widely. Chris frowned. "When?" "Now, as soon as I warm up the copter." Forrest pulled the Kevlar vest over his t-shirt as he spoke. "While you alphas sit and take notes, we're kicking some cannibal ass." "Yeah, well, you just watch your ass, okay? I still think there's more going on here than a couple of slobbering nut jobs hanging out in the woods." "Oh, you know it." Forrest pushed his hair back and grabbed his utility belt, obviously dedicated to the mission. Chris thought about saying more, but he decided not to in the end. For all of his bravado, Forrest was a professional. He didn't need the careful word. But did he, though, Chris? Do you think Billy was careful enough? Chris inwardly sighed, slaps Forrest's shoulder lightly, and heads for ops through the doorway of the small waiting room upstairs and down the hall. Although it was standard for the less experienced stars to do recon first, this case wasn't exactly a standard operation. The number of deaths alone was enough to call for a more aggressive offense. The fact that were signs of organized murders had brought to A1 status, yet Wesker was treating it as if it was some kind of training run. Nobody else sees it. They didn't know Billy. Chris thought again about the late-night call he had gotten last week from his childhood friend. He hadn't heard from Billy in a while, but knew he had taken a research position with Umbrella, the pharmaceutical company that was the single biggest contributor to the economic prosperity of Raccoon City. Billy had never been the type to jump at shadows, and his terrified desperation voice had jolted Chris awake, filling him with deep concern. Billy babbled that his life was in danger, and that they were all in danger. He begged for Chris to meet him at a diner at the edge of town, but he never showed up, and no one heard from him since. Chris had run it over and over again in his mind during the sleepless nights since Billy's disappearance, trying to convince himself that there was no connection to the attacks on Raccoon, and yet was unable to shake his growing uncertainty about the whole situation of the case. Billy must have known what it was. The cops had checked out Billy's apartment and found nothing strange, but Chris's instincts told him that his friend was dead, and he had been killed by someone who wanted him away from talking. But Irons didn't give a shit about it, and the teams thought he just torn up over the loss of an old friend. Chris pushed aside his thoughts as he turned around the corner. The boot heels send low echoes through the arched second-floor corridor. He must focus, keeping his mind on what could do to find out Billy's disappearance. But he also exhausted, running on a minimum of sleep and constant anxiety that had plagued him since Billy's call. Maybe he was losing his perspective, his objectivity dulled by recent events. Chris forced himself not to think about it as he neared the Star's office, determined to be clear-headed for the meeting. The buzzing fluorescence above seemed like overkill in the blazing evening light that filled the tight hallway. Raccoon Police Building was a classic. if an unconventional piece of architecture, lots of inlaid tile and heavy wood, but it had too many windows designed to catch the sun. When he had been a kid, the building was Raccoon City's hall. With the population increased a decade back, it had been renovated as a library, and 4 years ago turned into a police station. It seemed like there was always some kind of construction going on. The door to the Star's office stood open, the muted sounds of gruff male voices spilling out into the hall. Chris hesitated a moment, hearing Chief Irons amongst them. Iron was a self-centered and self-serving politician masquerading as a cop. It was no secret that he had his sweaty fingers in more than a few local pies. He had even been implicated in the Cider District land scam back in '94, and although nothing had been proved in court, anyone who knew him personally didn't harbor any doubt. Chris shook his head listening to Iron's greasy voice. He hardly believes that the man once led Raccoon Stars, even as a paper pushed. Maybe even harder to believe that he would probably end up as mayor someday. Of course, it doesn't help much that he also hated your guts, does it, Redfield? Yeah, well, Chris didn't like to kiss ass, and Irons didn't know what to do. And Irons didn't know how to have any other kind of relationship. At least Irons wasn't a total incompetent. He had some military training. Chris pasted on a straight face and stepped into the small, cluttered office that had served as the Star's filing cabinet and base of operations. Barry and Joseph were over by the rookie desk, going through a box of papers and talking quietly. Brad Vickers, the Alpha pilot, was drinking coffee and staring at the main computer screen a few feet away, wearing a sour expression on his mild features. Across the room, Captain Wesker leaned on his chair, hands behind his head as he smiled blankly at something Chief Irons was telling him. Irons' bulk was leaned against Wesker's desk. One pudgy hand brushed at his carefully groomed mustache as he spoke. So, I said, you're going to print what I tell you to print, Bertolucci, and you're going to like it or you'll never get another quote from this office. Chris, Wesker said as he interrupted the chief, sitting forward, and says, now that you're here, we can stop wasting time. Irons scowled in his direction, but Chris kept his poker face. Wesker didn't care much for Irons either, and didn't bother trying to be polite with the man. From the glint in his eyes, it was obvious that he didn't care who knew it either. Chris walked into the office and stood by the desk he shared with Ken Sullivan, one of the Bravo team. Since the teams usually worked different shifts, they didn't need much room. He placed the soda on the battered desktop and looked at Wesker. You're sending Bravo? Standard procedure, Chris, the captain said while folding his arms across his chest. Chris sat down, frowns. I know, but since the topic we talked last week, I thought... Irons interrupted Chris, says, I gave the order, Redfield. I know you think that there's some kind of cloak and dagger going on here, but I don't see any reason to deviate from policy. What a prick. Chris forced a smile, knowing it would irritate Irons. Of course, sir. No need to explain yourself on my behalf. Irons glared at him, his piggy little eyes snapping. Then the man apparently decided to let it slide. He turned back to Wesker, says, I'll expect a report once Bravo returns. Now if you'll excuse me, Captain. Wesker nodded. Chief? Irons stalked past Chris and out of the room. He had gone less than a minute before Barry started to talk. Think the chief has taken a shit today? Maybe we all ought to chip in for Christmas, get him some laxatives. Joseph and Brad laughed, but Chris couldn't bring himself to join the fun. Irons was a clown, and his mishandling of an investigation wasn't funny. Star should have been called in at the beginning, not acting as RPD's backup. Chris looked at Wesker. The man's perpetually composed expression was hard to read. Wesker had taken over Raccoon Stars since a few months ago, transferred by the Home Office in New York, and Chris still didn't have any real insight into his character. The new captain seemed to be everything he praised for. Smooth, professional, cool, but there was some kind of distance to him, a sense that he was often far removed from what was going on. Wesker sighed and stood up. Sorry, Chris. I know you wanted things to go different, but Irons didn't put a whole lot of stock into your misgivings. Chris nodded. Wesker could make recommendations, but Irons was the only one who could call the decision. Not your fault. Barry walked towards them, scruffing at his short reddish beard with one giant fist. Barry Burton was only 6 feet tall, but built like a truck. His only passion outside of his family and his weapons collection was weightlifting, and the result had proven. Don't sweat it, Chris. Marini will call us in the second he smells trouble. Irons is just pulling your chain. Chris nodded again, but he didn't feel like it. Enrico Marini and Forrest Speyer were the only experienced soldiers in Bravo. Ken Sullivan was a good scout and a brilliant chemist, but in spite of his STARS training, he couldn't shoot the broadside of a barn. Richard Aiken was a top-rate communications expert, but he also lacked field experience. Rounding out the Bravo team was Rebecca Chambers, who had only been in STARS for 3 weeks, supposed to be some kind of medical genius. Chris met her a couple times and she seemed bright enough, but eventually was just a kid. It's not enough. Even with all of them, it may not be enough. Chris cracked open his soda but didn't drink any, wondering what kind of threat that Stars was actually facing. Billy's pleading and desperate words echoed through his mind again. They're going to kill me, Chris. They're going to kill everyone who knows. Meet me at Emmy's now. I'll tell you everything. Chris stared off into space with his exhausted face, alone in the knowledge that the savage murders were only the tip of the proverbial iceberg. Chris stood near Chris's desk for a minute, seemingly trying to say something, but Chris doesn't look in the mood to talk. Barry shrugged inwardly as he headed back to where Joseph was going through files. Chris was a good guy, but he took things too hard sometimes. He would get over it as soon as it was their turn to step in. Man, it was hot, Barry inwardly said, endless sweat as if rolled down his spine, gluing his t-shirt to his broad back. The air conditioning was on the fritz as usual, and even with the door open, the tiny Star's office was uncomfortably warm. Any luck? Joseph looked up at him from the pile of papers. A rueful smirk appeared on his lean face. Are you joking? It's like somebody hid the damn thing on purpose. Barry sighed and picked a handful of files. Maybe Jill found it and took her back to her home. She's still here when I left last night, going through the witness reports about like the 100th time. What are you two looking? Brad asked. They looked at Brad, still sitting at the computer console with the headset on. He would be monitoring Bravo's progress throughout their flyby on the forested district, but it will happen later, so he looked bored as hell. Barry claims there are floor plans of old Spencer estate in here, some architectural digest that came out when the house was built, Joseph said before he paused, then grinned at Brad. Except that I'm thinking that old Barry had gone senile on us. They say memory's the first thing to go. Barry scowled and says, Old Barry could easily kick your ass in the next week, little man. Joseph looked at him with a mocking smile. Yeah, but would you remember it afterwards? Barry chuckled and shook his head. He was only 38, but had been with the Raccoon Stars for 15 years, making him the senior member. It was understandable many will mock him with old age jokes. Well, mostly came out from Joseph. Brad wrinkled his eyebrows. The Spencer place? Why would it be in a magazine? You kids gotta learn your history, Barry said. It was designed by the one and only George Trevor just before he disappeared. He was that hot shit architect who did all those weird skyscrapers in D.C. In fact, Trevor's disappearance may have been the reason why Spencer shut his mansion. Rumor says that Trevor went crazy during the construction, and when it was finished, he got lost and wandered the halls until he starved to death. Brad scoffed but looked uneasy. That's bullshit. I never heard anything like that. Joseph winked at Barry. No, it's true. Now his tortured ghost roams the estate at night, all pale and emancipated, and I've heard that sometimes you can hear him calling out, Brad Vickers, bring me Brad Vickers. Brad flushed slightly, said, yeah, Frost is a real comedian. Barry helplessly smiled, wonders again how Brad ever made it in Alpha. He was no doubt he's the best hacker working for Stars, and a decent enough pilot, but he wasn't so hot under pressure. Joseph had been calling him Chicken Heart Vickers when he wasn't around, and while the Stars had generally stuck up for one another, nobody scolded him. So why Spencer shut it down? Brad said to Barry, his cheeks still red. Barry shrugged. I don't really know myself. It was supposed to be some kind of guest house for Umbrella's top execs. Trevor did disappear right about the time of completion, but Spencer was a wacko anyway. He decided to move Umbrella's headquarters to Europe. I forget where, and just boarded up the mansion. Probably a couple $1,000,000 straight to the crapper. Joseph sneered. Right, like Umbrella ever lacked money. True enough, Spencer might have been crazy, but money and business made him capable to hire the right people. Umbrella was one of the biggest medical research and pharmaceutical companies on the planet. 30 years ago, they lose a few $1,000,000, but still a giant up to this date. Anyway, Joseph went on, the Umbrella people told Irons that they would send in someone to check out the mansion and that it was secure, no break-ins. So why look for blueprints? Brad asked. Because it's the only place in the woods that hasn't been checked over by the police, and it's practically in the middle of crime scenes. And because you can't always trust what people say. It was Chris who answered him, has walked to join their conversation at Starling Berry. His expression was tensed, even almost obsessed. Brad frowned, but if Umbrella sent somebody out... Whatever Chris was going to say in response, Wesker's smooth voice had cut it out. Alright, people. Time out. And it appears Miss Valentine isn't keen on joining us, so let's get started, shall we? Barry walked to his desk, worried about Chris for the first time since this whole thing had started. He had recruited the younger man for Stars a few years back thanks to a chance encounter in a local gun shop. Chris had proved to be an asset to the team, bright and thoughtful as well as top-notch marksman and skillful pilot. But now... Barry gazed fondly at the picture of Kathy and the girls that sat on his desk. Chris's obsession with the murders in Raccoon City was understandable, particularly since his friend had disappeared. Nobody in town wanted to see another life lost. Barry had family and was determined as anyone else in the team to stop the killers. But Chris's relentless suspicion had gone a little overboard, the words he said before. You can't always trust what people say. Either he said Umbrella was lying, or Chief Irons was. Ridiculous. Umbrella's branch chemical plant and administrative buildings on the outskirts of town supplied 3/4 of the jobs in Raccoon City. It would be counterproductive for them to lie. Besides, Umbrella's integrity was at least as solid as any other major corporation's. Maybe some industrial espionage, but medical secret swapping was a far cry from murder. And Chief Irons, though a fatty, weaselly blowhard, wasn't the kind to get his hands any dirtier than they would get accepting illegal campaign funds. The guy wanted to be mayor. Barry's gaze lingered in the picture of his family a moment longer before he turned his chair around to face Wesker's desk, and he suddenly realized that he wanted Chris to be wrong. Whatever was going on in Raccoon City, that kind of vicious brutality couldn't be planned, and that meant Barry didn't know what the hell that meant. He sighed and waited for the meeting to begin. Oh, Jesus Christ, I hate it when this comes up. I'm so sorry. Stupid. Alright. Anyway, let's read some. Sabrina, you look different. Hello! Hey, Anna, how's it going? How did I miss your comment down, like, when I went over the first chapter? But yeah, thank you. Yeah, I got my hair dyed pink and stuff, so. I've heard Forrest was Chris' best buddy at the time, but never read about it. Well, there you go. Iron's greasy voice is wild. Hey, Sabrina, how are you? Is this mythical? No, we're reading The Umbrella Conspiracy by S.D. Perry. It is the first in the Resident Evil novels, and it is a novelization of the first game. So, yeah. But, hello, Anna. Hello, Stank. How are you guys doing? Welcome to stream. Pleasure to see you guys as always. Oh, yeah. So, like, one thing I thought was pretty interesting, though, is that they said Forrest was, like, the best marksman on their team. So it's like, every time I read that, I just think to myself, like, how? How did he end up dying? Well, whatever. Is it like Resident Evil erotica? It's just a regular, like, book about it's just the first game but written as a book. And then, like, this is just like a section before they go to the mansion explaining, like, why they're there and the background and everything, and stuff's going on. So we're just like in the very beginning of the book still, so nothing's really like happened yet. But no, it's not any kind of erotica. I promise. It's just Resident Evil. Remember, the crows got him. Oh, that's right. Yeah, you can't really shoot the crows like that. Good point. There's a theory Wesker purposely armed Forrest with a grenade launcher to handicap his skill set, but I don't buy it. He's just skilled. Ooh, I see. I feel like Resident Evil erotica would be a hit for some people. I think so. I think it would. I will say that there are a lot of, like, people in the Resident Evil community that are, like, also gooners. So you see a lot of that stuff, like, when you're on, like, anything social media related to Resident Evil. It's, like, almost a problem. Alright. But yeah, hydration reminder, everyone. I need some water and keep reading. So. And I know Mitchell's not here today, but I got Rio Punch this time just to be different. So, Mitchell, if you're watching this later on, just know I got the Rio Punch. Alright. Chapter 3, Chapter 2. Jill was deeply relieved to hear Wesker's voice as she jogged toward the open door of the STARS office. She saw one of their helicopters taking off as she arrived. Thinks they had left without her. Stars was rather casual in some respects, but there wasn't any room for people who couldn't keep up either, let alone she wanted to be part of the case from the beginning. The RPD has established a perimeter search spanning Sector 1, 4, 7, and 9. It's the central zones we're concerned with, and Bravo will assign there. At least she wasn't pretty late. Wesker always ran meetings the same way: update speech, theory, and then Q&A. Jill took a deep breath and stepped into the office, finding Wesker was pointing at the posted map at the front of the room, marked with colored tags where the bodies had been discovering. He hardly faltered in his speech as she walked quickly to her desk, feeling like she was back in basic training and showed up late for the case. Chris Redfield threw her a half smile as she sat down, nods back at him before focusing on Wesker. She didn't know any of the others that well, but Chris had made a real effort to welcome her since the first day she showed up. After a flyby of the other central areas, once they report in, we'll have a better idea of where to focus our energies. But what about the Spencer Mansion? Chris asked. If it's in the middle of the crime scenes, if we start from there, we can conduct a more complete search. If Bravo's information leads to that area, rest assured we'll search there. For now, I don't see any reason to consider it a priority. Chris looked skeptical, but we only have Umbrella's word that mansion is secure. Wesker leaned against his desk. His firm features stayed impassive. Chris, we all want to solve the case, but we must work as a team, and the best approach is to do a thorough search for the missing hikers before we start jumping to conclusions. Bravo will collect information for us then, and we'll conduct the operation by the book. Chris frowned but said nothing else. Jill resisted the urge to roll her eyes at Wesker's little speech. Well, technically, he did write, but he had left out the part about being politic, as Chief Irons wanted. The man had made it clear time and again throughout the killing spree that he was in charge of the investigation, calling the shots. It wouldn't have bothered her so much except that Wesker presented himself as an independent thinker, a man who didn't play politics. She joined STARS because she couldn't stand the bullshit red tape that dominated so much of law enforcement, and Wesker's obvious attentive to the chief was annoying. Well, don't forget that you stood a good chance of ending up in prison if you hadn't changed your occupation. Ah, Jill, I see you managed to find the time to come in. Please, share us your brilliant insight. Jill met Wesker's intense gaze, seeming to seem as calm and composed as he was. Nothing new, I'm afraid. The only obvious pattern is the location. She looked down at the notes and then stack of files, scans them for reference. The tissue samples from underneath both Becky McGee's and Krista Smith's fingernails were an exact match. We got that yesterday. And Tanya Lipton, the third victim, has been hiking the foothills. That would be Sector 7B. She looked back at Wesker and made her pitch. My theory is that this point is that possible ritualistic cult hiding in the mountains. 4 to 11 members reliable with guard dogs trained to attack intruders of their territory. Extrapolate. Wesker folded his arms, waiting. No one laughed. At least Jill thought before and continued. The cannibalism and dismemberment suggest ritualistic behavior, as does the presence of decomposed flesh found on some of the victims, like the killers are carrying parts of their previous unknown victims to their attack. We've got saliva and tissue samples from the 4 separate human assailants, though eyewitness reports suggest up to 10 or 11 people, and those killed by animals were all found to be attacked in the same vicinity. Possibly, they wandered into a restricted area. The saliva traces appear to be canine, though there was still some disagreement. She trailed off before it went silent. Wesker's face betrayed nothing, but he nodded. Not bad at all. Not bad at all. Deny? Jill sighed. She hated having to shoot down her own theory, but that was part of the job, and honestly, the part that most encouraged clear, rational thinking. STARS train their people not to fixate on any single path to the truth. Jill glanced at her notes again. It's unlikely that a cult with this scale moved around that much, and the murder started very recently to be local. The RPD wouldn't have seen signs before now. Some escalation of this kind of behavior. Also, the level of post-mortem violence indicates disorganized offenders, and they usually work solo. Joseph Frost, the Alpha's vehicle specialist, piped up from the back of the room. The animal attack part works, though, protecting their territory and all that. Wesker picked up a pen and walked to the dry erase board next to his desk, talking as he moved. I agree. He wrote territorially on the board and turned back to face her. Anything else? Jill shook her head, but felt too good that she had contributed something. She knew that the cult aspect was overboard, and it's the only thing she could come up with. The police certainly hadn't come up with anything better. Wesker turned his attention to Brad Vickers, who suggested that it was a new strain of terrorism and the demands would be made soon. He put terrorism on the board, but it doesn't appear enthusiastic about it. Neither did anyone else. Brad quickly went back to his headset, checking on Bravo Team's status. Both Joseph and Barry threw out their theory. Chris's views on the killings were already well known. He believed it was an organized assault with some external influence. Wesker had asked if he had anything new to add, stressing new, Jill noticed, and Chris shook his head, looking depressed.
Oh.
Wesker capped the black pen and sat on the edge of his desk, gazing thoughtfully at the blank expanse of the board, and says, "It's a start. I know you've all read the police and coroner reports, and I listened to the eyewitness accounts." "Vicar here, over." Brad spoke quietly into his headset, interrupting Wesker. The captain lowered his voice and continued, "Now at this point, we don't know what threat we are facing, and I know that all of us have some concerns with how RPD has been dealing with the case. But now that we're on the case, I'd like to..." "What?" Brad's voice was high at this time, gaining attention on everyone else in the room. Brad stood up, looks agitated, one hand pressed to the earpiece of his set. "Bravo Team, report." "Repeat, Bravo Team, report." Wesker stood up, quickly says, "Vickers, put it on comm." Brad hit the switch on his console and the bright, crackling sound of static filled the room. Jill strained to hear a human voice amidst the fuzz, but for several tense seconds there was nothing. "You copy? Malfunction, we're going to have to..." The rest was lost in a burst of static. It sounded like Enrico Marini, the Bravo Team leader. Jill chewed on her lower lip and exchanged a worried glance with Chris. Enrico had seemed frantic. They tried to listen for another moment, but nothing entered the comm anymore. "Position," Wesker snapped. Brad's face was pale. "They're in, Sector 22 at the tail end of C, except I've lost the signal. The transmitter's offline." Jill, stunned, seized the feeling reflected in others' faces. The helicopter's transmitter was designed to keep working no matter what. The only way it would shut down if something big happened, like the entire system blanking out or being seriously damaged. Like a crash. Chris felt his stomach knot as he recognized the coordinates. The Spencer Mansion. Marini said something about a malfunction. It had to be a coincidence, but it didn't feel like one. The Bravo Mansion was in trouble, and practically on top of the old Umbrella Mansion. All this went through his head in a split second, and then he was steady. He was standing, ready to move. Whatever happened, Stars took care as their member. Wesker was also... there. I swear, I think it's... I apologize for, interrupting this, but some of this is worded really weird, and I think it's just on here. I don't think the actual book is worded like this, because I don't remember reading it like this. But, whatever happened, Stars took care's their member. That, stuff like that, I'm like, what? So it's so I apologize sometimes if there's a small, hiccup here and there. I do have to take some of these sentences and kind of, smooth them out, I guess. So, just bear with me here. I'm sorry, guys. He ordered the team even as he reached for his keys, heading for the gun safe. "Joseph, take over the radio. Keep trying to contact them." "Vickers, warm up the copter and get clearance. I want us ready to fly in 5. Captain unlocked the safe as Brad handed the headset to Joseph and hurled out of the room. The reinforced metal door swung open, revealing an arsenal of rifles and handguns, along with boxes of ammo. Wesker turned to the rest of them. His expression was stoic, but his voice brisked with an authority. "Barry, Chris, I want you to get the weapons into the copter, loaded and secured. Jill, get the vests and packs. Meet us on the roof." He clipped a key off his ring and tossed it to her. "I'm going to notify Irons. Make sure he gets us some backup and EMTs down at the barricade," Wesker said, then blew out sharply. 5 minutes or less, folks. Let's move." Jill left for the locker room, and Barry grabbed one of the empty duffel bags from the bottom of the gun safe. Nods at Chris. Chris picked a second bag and started loading boxes of shells, cartridges, and clips as Barry carefully handled the weapons, checking each one. Behind them, Joseph tried to call the Bravo team, but no avail. Chris wondered again about the proximity of the Bravo team's last position. It's no doubt that Spencer mentioned there was a connection, and if so, how? Billy worked for Umbrella, and they owned the mansion. "Chief, Wesker, we just lost contact with Bravo. I'm taking us in." Wesker quickly relayed the information to Irons over the phone, and he hung up, walking back to join them. Chris felt a sudden rush of adrenaline and worked faster, aware that every second counted, could mean the difference between life and death for his friends and teammates. A serious crash was not possible. The Bravo supposedly flies low, and Forrest was a decent pilot. But what about after they gone down? "I'm going up. Make sure our copter outfitted. Joseph, give it another minute and turn it over to the boys at the front desk. You can help these two carry equipment up. I'll see you on top. Wesker nodded at them and hurried out. His footsteps clattered loudly down the hall. He's good, Barry said quietly, and Chris agreed. It was reassuring to see their new captain didn't rattle easily. Chris still wasn't sure how he felt about a man personally, but his respect for Wesker was growing by the minute. Come in, Bravo, do you copy? Repeat, Joseph patiently went on, his voice tight with strain, the pleas lost to a haze of white static that pulsed out into the room. Wesker strode down the deserted hall and through the shabbier of the two second-floor waiting rooms, nods briskly at a pair of uniforms by the soda machine. The door to the outside landing was chucked open. A faint and humid breeze cuts through the stickiness of the air outside. It's still daylight, but not for much longer. He hoped that wouldn't complicate matters, although he figured it probably would. Wesker took a turn to the left and started walking down the winding corridor that led to the helipad, absently running through a mental checklist. Hailing open procedure, weapons, gear, report. He knew that everything was in order, but he went through it again. Anyway, it didn't pay to get sloppy, and assumptions were the first step down that path. Wesker liked to think of himself as a man of precision, one who had taken all possibilities into account and decided on the best course of action after thoroughly weighing all factors. Control was what had been a competent leader was all about, but to close this case, he shut the thought down before it could get any further. He knows what had to be done. There was still plenty of time. All he needed is to concentrate on rescuing the Bravo team safe and sound. Wesker opened the door at the end of the hall and stepped out into the bright evening, the rising hum of the copter's engine and the smell of machine oil filling his senses. The small rooftop helipad was cooler than outside, partly draped by the shadow of an aging water tower and empty except for the gunmetal gray Alpha helicopter. For the first time, he wondered what had gone wrong for Bravo. He and Joseph had the rookie check both birds out yesterday, and they were fine. All systems go. He dismissed the train of thought as he walked toward the copter, his shadow falling longly across the concrete. It didn't matter why, not anymore. What mattered was what came next. Expect the unexpected. That was Starr's motto, although that basically meant to prepare for anything. Expect nothing. That was Albert Wesker's motto. A little less catchy, but infinitely more useful. It virtually guaranteed that nothing would ever surprise him. He stepped up into the open pilot door and got a shaky thumbs up from Vickers. The man looked positively green, and Wesker considered whether he should stay behind. Chris was licensed to fly, and Vickers had a reputation for choking under the gun. The last thing he needed was one of his people to freeze up when the troubles arise. When he thought about lost Bravos and decided against it, this was a rescue mission. The worst Vickers could do was to be throw up on himself with the helicopter had crashed badly. Wesker could live with that. He opened up the side door and crouched his way into the cabin, doing a quick inventory of all the equipment that lined the walls. Emergency flares, ration kits. He popped on the lid of the heavy, dented footlocker behind the benches and looked through the basic medical supplies, nodding to himself. They were as ready as they were going to be. Wesker grinned suddenly, wondering what Brian Irons was doing right now. Shitting his pants, no doubt. Wesker chuckled as he stepped back out into the sun-baked asphalt, getting a sun-clear mental image of Irons, his pudgy cheeks red with anger and crap dribbling down his leg. Irons liked to think that he is in control of everything and everyone around him, and lost his temper when he knew he's actually not, and that made him an idiot. That's another one of those sentences that were really funky. Unfortunately for all of them, he was an idiot with a little bit of power. Wesker had checked him out carefully before taking the position in Raccoon City and knew a few things about Chief that didn't paint him in a particularly positive light. He had no intention of using that information, but if Irons attempted to screw things up one more time, Wesker had no qualms about letting that information get out. Or at least tell him that he had access to it. It would certainly keep him out of the way. Barry Burton stepped onto the concrete while carrying the ammo cache. His giant biceps flexed as he shifted the hold on the heavy canvas bag and rode to the copter. Chris and Joseph followed, Chris with the sidearms, and Joseph loved a satchel of RPGs, the compact grenade launcher slung over his shoulder. Wesker marveled at Burton's brute strength as the Alpha climbed in and casually set the bag down as if it didn't weigh over 100 pounds. Barry was bright enough, but in Stars, the muscle was a definite asset. Everyone else in his squad was in good shape, but compared to Barry, they were pencil necks. As the three of them stored the equipment, Wesker turned his attention back to the door, watching for Jill. He checked his watch and frowned. It had been just under 5 minutes since their last contact with Bravo. They had made excellent time, but where the hell was Valentine? He hadn't interacted with her much since she came to Raccoon, but her file was a rave review. She had gotten high recommendations from everyone she had worked with, praised by her last captain as highly intelligent and usually calm in a crisis. Well, she would have to be with her history. Her father was Dick Valentine, the best thief in the business a couple decades back. He trained her how to follow in his footsteps. The word had it she was doing quite well until Daddy had been incarcerated. Prodigy or not, she could stand to buy a decent watch. He silently urged Jill to get her ass into gear and motioned for Vickers to start the blades turning. It was time to find out how bad things were out there. Alright. I've seen an Ada figure. That's why I take it when you take the clothes off. Thought it was a bootleg, but it's not. Extrapolate. What, did I say that wrong? Extrapolate? Is that what it is? Damn, Brad William bails on conversation. This guy, man. He does, yeah. You should do ASMR, sis. You have a very relaxing reading voice. Thank you. I have actually considered doing that before. I have a few like ideas for some scripts and stuff that I've been considering, and I might actually release some ASMR on my channel. I never even really thought about the fact that Chris is the co-pilot. Yeah. I bet. Alright, hydration reminder. We're on the next chapter, you guys. Make sure you drink that water. So did they contact the STARS office from the mansion or immediately after the helicopter crash? Wondering when Wesker does his little RE0 side quest. Well, you gotta remember too, this book was written in 1998, so RE0 didn't exist yet. So, they probably didn't write that down. If you think about it. Right. I'm going to pee real quick and then we will continue. So, I'll be right back, you guys. Okay. We are back. Yeah, because Edward don't even exist. Exactly. So, yeah, this is like, and it depends like when this even came out in 1998, because this could have came out before like any of the other games, like before RE2 or anything. I gotta Google this now. Released in North America November 16th, 1999. No, it says right here January 21st, 1998 in North America. So it has two different things, depending on which source you're getting it from. I'd be surprised if they came up with irons before the game appearance. Well, maybe. I'm trying to find the actual date because, like... Yeah, it's January 21st, 1998. I don't know why it told me... Why. There was another Wikipedia article that told me it was 1999. So I was like, I know it's 1998. What the heck? Yeah, no. So yeah, this came out first. So it came out like right before the book did. And there you go. Alright. Chapter 4, Chapter 3. In the dim and silent Star's locker room, Jill's arms had been full of two bulging duffel bags. She set them down and quickly pulled back her hair, tucking it into her well-worn black beret. Though the climate was hot, she was in her lucky hat and wouldn't want to leave it behind. She glanced at her watch before hefting the bags, glad to know that she only needed 3 minutes to load them up. She had gone through all the Alpha's lockers, grabbing utility belts, fingerless gloves, Kevlar vests, and shoulder packs. Seeing that each cabinet reflected its user's natures, Barry filled with snapshots of his family and a pin-up from a gun magazine. A rare .45 Luger, shining against red velvet. Chris had pictures of his Air Force buddies, boyish mess-crumpled t-shirts, some wobbly papers, and a glow-in-the-dark broken string yo-yo. Brad Vickers had a stack of self-help books, and Joseph, a Three Stooges calendar. Only Wesker's didn't have a single personal effect, and it doesn't surprise her. The captain struck her as too tightly wound to place much value on sentiment. Her own locker had some used paperback novels, a toothbrush, floss, breath mints, and 3 hats. On the door was a small mirror and an old frayed photo of her and Dick, taken when she was a child, and they had gone to the beach one summer. As Jill prepared the Alpha's gears, she decided that she would redecorate it later. Anyone looking through her locker would think she was a dental freak. She crouched a bit and fumbled at the latch to the door, balancing the awkward bags on one raised knee. She had just grasped it when someone coughed loudly behind her. Jill startled, then dropped the bags before quickly spinning, looking at the cougher, as her mind reflectively assessed the situation. The door was locked, and the small room held 3 banks of lockers, the place also quiet and dark when she came in. There was another door in the back of the room, but no one came through it since she had entered. That meant the cougher was already here before she entered the room, in the shadows behind the last bank. Who is it, a cop grabbing a nap? Unlikely. The department's lunchroom had a couple of bunks in the back, a lot more comfortable than a narrow bench over cold concrete. Then maybe just someone who's enjoying a little leisure time with a magazine. Wait, does it matter though? Jill, you're in a hurry. She picked the bags and prepared to leave when the low musical voice resounded from the shadow. Miss Valentine? Jill stopped once again and turned her face, finding a tall man, about in his early 40s, and possessed a thin figure walked out from the back of the room. His hair was dark, while also having a pair of deep-set eyes. He wore a trench coat, an expensive one. Jill readied herself to move quickly if the man means harm. Besides, she didn't recognize him. That's right, she said warily. The man stepped toward her. A smile flickered across his face. I have something for you. Jill squinted her eyes and shifted automatically into a defensive position, balancing her weight on the balls of her feet. Hold it, asshole. I don't know who the hell you think you are, or what you think I want, but you're in a police station. You mistake my intentions, Miss Valentine. Excuse my manners. My name is Trent, and a friend of the stars. Jill observed his posture and position. Didn't feel any threat coming from him. She relaxed her stance slightly. What do you want? Trent grinned, lowly says. Of course, straight to the point. Then again, you are in a hurry. He slowly reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out something like a cell phone. Maybe this is not important, but I think you should have it. Jill glanced at the item, says with a frown, What is it? A device that will show you a rather few interesting documents, Trent said as he offered the item. Jill reached in wary, realizing that it was a mini disk reader, a very complicated and costly microcomputer. This Trent seemed well financed. Jill tucked the reader into the pack on her hip and looks at him with curiosity. Who do you work for? Trent shook his head. That's not important, not at this juncture. Although I can say that there are a lot of pretty important people watching Raccoon City right now. Oh, and they are supposedly the friends of the stars, too? Trent laughed with a soft and deep chuckle. So many questions, yet so little time. Read the files. And if I were you, I wouldn't mention our meeting with anyone. The consequence is rather serious. He walked towards the door in the back of the room, turning his back to her as he reached for the knob. Trent looked at her. The weathered traits on his face suddenly lost all humor. His gaze was serious and intense. "One more thing, Miss Valentine. And this is serious, make no mistake. Not everyone can be trusted, and not everyone is who they appear to be, even the people close to you. If you want to stay alive, best remember my advice." Trent opened the door and disappeared behind it. Jill stared after him. Her mind went in a million directions at once. She felt like she was in some kind of melodramatic old spy movie and had just met the mysterious stranger. It was laughable, and yet he handed you several $1,000s worth of equipment with a straight face and told you to watch your back? Was he joking? She didn't know what to think, and she didn't have time to think. The Alpha team was probably had assembled, waiting and wondering where the hell she was. She shouldered the heavy bags and hurried out the door. They had gotten the weapons loaded and secured, and Wesker was getting impatient. Although his eyes were hidden by the dark aviator sunglasses, Chris could see it in the captain's stance and in the way he kept his head cocked towards the building. The helicopter was prepped and ready, the blades whipping warm, humid air through the tight compartment. With the door open, the sound of the engine drowned out any attempt at conversation. There was nothing to do but wait. "Come on, Jill, don't slow us up here," Chris thought. But from the building, Jill suddenly emerged while jogging towards them. She carried the Alpha gear with both arms and an apologetic look on her face. Wesker jumped down to help her, taking one of the stuffed bags as she climbed aboard. Wesker followed, closing the double hatches behind them. Instantly, the roar of the turbine engine was mute to a dull thrum. "Problem, Jill?" Wesker didn't sound angry, but there was an edge to his voice that suggested he wasn't all that happy either. Jill shook her head. "One of the lockers was stuck. I had a hell of a time getting the key to work." Captain stared at her for a moment as if deciding whether or not to give her a hard time, then shrugged. "I'll call maintenance when we get back. Now distribute the gear." He picked up a headset and put it on, moving to sit next to Brad as Jill started passing out the vests. The helicopter lifted slowly, leaving behind the RPD building as Brad steered it towards the northwest. Chris crouched next to Jill after donning his vest, helping her sort through the gloves and belts as they sped over the city towards the Arklay Mountains. The busy urban streets below quickly gave way to the suburbs, wide streets and quiet houses set amidst squares of browning grass and picket fences. An evening haze had settled over the sprawling but isolated community, fuzzing the edges of the picturesque view and giving it an unreal, dreamlike quality. Minutes passed in silence as Alphas prepared themselves and belted in, each team member preoccupied with his or her own thoughts. With any luck, the Bravo team's helicopter had suffered only a minor mechanical failure. Forrest would have set it down in one of the scraggly open fields that dotted the forest and was probably up to his elbows in grease by now, cursing at the engine while waiting for Alpha to show. Without the bird in working order, Marini wouldn't start the proposed search. The alternative? No, there shouldn't be. Chris doesn't want to consider any alternative. He had once seen the aftermath of a serious copter crash back in the Air Force. A pilot error had led to the fall of a Huey carrying 11 men and women to a training mission. By the time the rescuers had arrived, there had been nothing but charred, smoking bones amidst the fiery debris. The sweet, sticky smell of gasoline, roasted flesh was heavy in the blackened air, even though the ground had been burning, and that the image had haunted his dreams for months afterwards, the earth on fire, the chemical flames devouring the very soil beneath his feet. There was a slight dip in their altitude. Brad adjusted the rotor pitch, jolting him out of the unpleasant memory. The ragged outskirts of Raccoon Forest slipped by below, the orange markers of the police blockade standing out against the thick, softened green of the trees. Twilight was finally setting in, the forest growing heavy with shadow. "ETA 3 minutes, Brad called back, and Chris looked around in the cabin, noting the silent, grim expressions of his teammates. Joseph tied a bandana over his head and was intently relacing his boots. Barry was gently rubbing a soft cloth over his beloved Colt python, staring out the hatch window. Chris turned his head to look at Jill, and surprised to find that she actually stared at him. She was sitting on the same bench as him. Catching his eyes fell on her, Jill smiled briefly, almost nervously. She somehow unhooked her belt and moved to sit next to him. A faint scent of clean and soapy smell entered his nose. "Chris, what have you been saying about the external factors in these cases?" Her voice was pitched so low that she had to lean in to hear over the throbbing of the engine. She glanced around to make sure that no one else listened, and then looked in his eyes. "I think you might be on the right track," she said softly, "and I'm starting to think that it might be a good idea to talk about. Or not such a good idea to talk about." Chris's throat felt dry. Says, "Did something happen?" She shook her head, her finely chiseled feature giving away nothing. "No, I've been thinking that maybe you should watch what you say. Maybe not everyone is listening to it is on your side." Chris frowned, not sure what she was trying to tell him. "The only people I told is the people on..." Chris suddenly stopped, realizing that what she was implying through her unwavering gaze. Well, I gotta get a drink of water. One sec, guys. Sorry. Yeah, I know. The smell like soap thing got me, and I was too hard thinking about that, and I was messing up my reading, thinking about that's such I don't know, shouldn't everyone smell like soap? Like, I don't know. That was some weird shit. Alright. And here he thought, he's the paranoid one. Jill, I know him. Even if I didn't, the stars have a psych profiles on one of every member. History checks, personal reference. There's just no way. She sighed. Look, forget I said anything, okay? I just want to tell you to watch yourself, that's all. Look lively, kids. We're coming up on the Sector 22. They could be anywhere. At Wesker's interruption, Jill gave him a final sharp glance, then moved to one of the windows. Chris followed. Joseph and Barry were taking the search up on the other side of the cabin. Looking out of the small window, he scanned the deepening dusk on the automatic, thinking about what Jill had said. He supposed he should be grateful that he wasn't the only one who suspected some kind of cover-up. But why hadn't she said anything before? And she warned him against the stars. She knew something. She must. It was the only explanation that made any sense. He decided that after they picked up Bravo, he would talk to her again, try to convince her that going to Wesker would be their best bet. With both of them pushing, the captain would have to listen. Chris stared at the seemingly endless sea of trees as the helicopter skimmed lower, forcing his full attention on the search. The Spencer mansion had to be close, though he couldn't see it in the fading light. Thoughts of Billy and Umbrella, and now Jill's strange warning circled through his exhaustion, trying to break his focus, but he refused to give in, still worried about Bravos. As trees and more trees swept by, Chris was becoming more convinced that they weren't in any real trouble. There was probably nothing worse than a crossed wire. Forrest had shut down to make repairs. But then he saw it, less than a mile away. Even as Jill pointed and spoke, his concern turned from cold to dread. Look, Chris! An oily plume of black smoke boiled through the last remnants of daylight, staining the sky like a promise of death. No, no! Barry clenched his jaw, staring at the stream of smoke that rose up from the trees, feeling sick. Captain, 2 o'clock sharp, Chris said, and they were turning, heading for the dark smudge that could mean a crash. Wesker moved back into the cabin, still wearing his shades. He stepped to the window and spoke quietly, his voice subdued. Let's not assume the worst. There's still a possibility that a fire broke out after they landed, or they could have started the fire on purpose as a signal. Barry wished he could believe him, but even Wesker had known better. With the copter shut down, a fire starting on its own was unlikely, and if the Bravos wanted to signal, they would have used flares. Besides, the wood didn't make that kind of smoke. Whatever it is, and we only know till we get there. Now, if I could have your full attention, please. Barry turned away from the window as the others do the same. Chris, Jill, and Joseph wore the same look, as he imagined he did. Stars sometimes got hurt in the line of duty. It was part of the job. But accidents like this? Wesker's only visible sign of distress was the set of his mouth, a thin, grim line against his tanned skin. Listen up. We've got people down in a possibly hostile environment. I want all of you armed, and I want an organized approach, a standard fan as soon as we set down. Barry, you'll take the point. Barry nodded, pulling himself together. Wesker was right. Now is not the time to get emotional. Brad's going to set us down as close to the site as he can get. Well, it looks like a small clearing about 50 meters south of their last coordinates. He'll stay with the copter and keep it warm in case of trouble. Any questions? Nobody spoke. Wesker nodded briskly. Good. Barry, load us up. We can leave as the rest of the gear on board and come back for it. The captain stepped up to the front to talk to Brad, while Jill, Chris, and Joseph turned to Barry. As a weapons specialist, he checked the firearms in and out to each STARS team member and kept them in prime condition. Barry turned to the cabinet next to the outer hatch and unhooked the latch, exposing 6 Beretta 9mm handguns on a metal rack, cleaned and sighted only yesterday. Each weapon held 15 rounds, semi-jacketed hollow points. It was a good gun, though Barry preferred his Python, a lot bigger punch with 357 rounds. Barry distributed the weapons, passing along the 3 loaded clips together. I hope we actually don't need it, Joseph said, slapping in the clip. Barry nodded. Just because he paid his dues at the NRA didn't mean he was some sugar-happy dumbass looking to kill. He just liked guns. Wesker joined them again, and the 5 of them stood at the hatch, waiting for Brad to bring them in. They gradually approached the plume of smoke. The helicopter's whirling blades pushed it down and out, creating a black fog that blended into the heavy shadows of the trees. Any chance of spotting the downed vehicle from the air was lost to the smoke and dusk. Brad swung them around and settled the bird into a scrappy patch of tall grass, snapping wildly from the forced wind. Even as the rails wobbled to the ground, Barry had his hand on the hatch, ready to move out. A warm hand fell on his shoulder. Barry turned and saw Chris looking at him intently. "We're right behind you," Chris said. And Barry nodded. He wasn't worried, not with the Alphas backing him up. All he was concerned with was Bravo Team's situation. Rico Marini was a good friend of his. Marini's wife had babysit the girls more times than Barry could count, and was a friend of Kathy. He thought of him dead to a stupid mechanical screw-up. "Hang on, buddy, we're coming." One hand on the butt of his Colt, Barry pulled the handle and stepped out in the humid, whipping twilight of Raccoon Forest, ready for anything. Alright. Alright, let's see what you guys said. Trent lives in Jill's head rent-free. You think so? You think the whole time she's... And, like, that's kind of funny to think about, too, is that... Like, they said that Chris was, like, super, like, exhausted and, like, had a ton of anxiety and stuff. So that's why Carlos was passed out in the helipad in RE3 Remake so long. Bro took a nap. She took so long. Bro took a nap. Yeah, literally, though, like... That's some Jill stuff to do right there. Chris slowly turned to Jill. "You smell like soap." Maybe Stars is full of sweat and that. Enrico is fine. Trent tyrant. That's right. You know, sometimes it'd be your own people. I'm telling you. Chapter 5, Chapter 4. They spread out and went to the north. Wesker and Chris respect. From the dim light filtering towards them, Jill saw the clearing ahead, high with brittle grasses. "I see it, dead ahead." She felt her heart speed up at Barry's shout, and they were all running, hurrying to catch up with him. Jill emerged from the scrub of trees, Joseph next to her. Barry was already at the downed helicopter, Chris and Wesker right behind. Smoke was rising from the silent wreck, but it was thinning. If there had been a fire, it had died out. She and Joseph reached the others and stopped, staring. No one uttered a word as they surveyed the scene. The long and broad body of the helicopter was intact, not a single scratch visible. The port landing rail looked bent, but besides that and the dying haze of smoke from the rotor, there seemed nothing wrong with it. The hatches stood open, Wesker's penlight showed them in an undamaged cabin, and most of Bravo's gear was still on board. So, where are they? It didn't make any sense. The last transmission was not over the last transmission was not over 15 minutes ago. If any of them had an injury, they wouldn't go anywhere. And if they decided to leave, why left the equipment behind? Chris handed the light to Joseph and nodded towards the cockpit. "Check for any problem. The rest of you spread out. Look for clues or tracks. Shell casings, signs of struggle, anything you can find. Don't forget to tell us and stay alert." Jill stared at the smoking helicopter and wondering what could have happened. Enrico mentioned about a malfunction, so okay, the Bravos had set down. But then what happened next? What would have made them abandon their best chance of being found, leaving behind emergency kits, weaponry, and bulletproof vests? She shook her head. Things are just growing weirder by seconds. She joined the search while Joseph stepped out of the cockpit, looking as confused as she felt. She waited to hear his report, and she handed the light back to Wesker, struggling nervously. "I don't know what happened. Aside from the electrical system, everything looks fine." Wesker sighed and then raised his voice so the others could hear. "Circle out, people. 3 meters apart, widen as we go." Jill moved to stand between Chris and Barry. Both men had scanned the ground at their feet as they slowly moved east and northeast of the helicopter. Wesker stepped into the cabin, probing the darkness with his penlight. Joseph headed west. Dry weeds crackled underfoot as they widened their circle, the only sound in the still warm air except for the distant hum of the Alpha helicopter engine. Jill used her boots to search through the thick ground cover, brushing the tall grasses aside with each step. In another few moments, it'd be too dark to see anything. They needed to break out the flashlights. Bravo had left theirs behind. She stopped and perched her ears, hearing the sigh and crackle steps of the others, and then the hum of the faraway drone of their helicopter. And nothing else. Not a chirp, a chitter, nothing. They were in the woods in the middle of summer. Where were the animals and insects? The forest was unnaturally tranquil, and she felt like the Alphas were the only presence of living being. For the first time since they had set down, Jill was afraid. intending to call out the others, but Joseph suddenly shouted from somewhere behind them. His voice was loud in hysteria. "Hey, over here!" Jill dashed toward him, seeing Chris and Barry did the same. Wesker was still in the helicopter, but had drawn his weapon at Joseph, cry pointing it up as he broke into a run. In the dim light, Jill could see Joseph's silhouette, squatted in the tall grass by the trees at 100 feet away from the helicopter. She pulled out her sidearm in almost instinct, and then running faster, the sense of encroaching doom somewhat overwhelmed her at this point. This chapter specifically is really bad. I think I might actually just buy this book and for the next time we read it. Honestly. Okay. Joseph stood up holding something and let out a strangled scream before dropping it, his eyes wide with horror. For a split second, Jill's mind couldn't accept what she had seen in Joseph's grasp. A STARS handgun, a Beretta, and a disembodied human hand curled around it, hacked off at the wrist. Jill ran faster, catching up to Wesker. But there was this deep guttural snarl from behind Joseph. From the darkness of the trees, an animal's growl, and then a raspy, throaty shriek that followed after. Powerful forms flushed out from the dark. It lunged at Joseph and took him down. "Joseph!" Jill's scream rang in his ears. Chris drew his weapon and stopped in his tracks, trying to get a clear shot at the raging beast that is assaulting Joseph. Wesker's penlight sent him a thin beam dancing over the twisting creatures, illuminating a nightmare. Joseph's body covered by the three animals that tore at him, ripping him off with their gnashing and dripping jaws. They were the size and shape of dogs, German shepherds maybe, except they seemed to have no fur and skin. Wet, red sinew and muscle flashed beneath Wesker's wavering light, and the dog creatures shrieking and snapping in a frenzy of bloodlust. Joseph cried out, a burbling liquid sound as he flailed weakly at the savage attackers, blood pouring from multiple wounds. It was the scream of a dying man. There was no time to waste. Chris targeted and opened fire. 3 rounds smacked wetly into one of the dogs, the 4th shot going high. There was a single high-pitched yelp as the beast went down, its sides heaving. The other 2 animals continued their onslaught on Joseph, indifferent to the thunderous shots. As Chris watched in horror, one of the slavering hellhounds lunged forward and ripped out Joseph's throat, exposing bloody gristle and this glistening sickness of bone. The stars opened up, sending a rain of explosive fire at Joseph's killers. The red splatters burst into the air, the dog things still trying to get at the spasming corpse while bullets riddled their strange flesh. With a final series of harsh, barking mules, they fell back and didn't rise again. "Hold your fire!" Chris took his finger off the trigger but continued to point his handgun at the fallen creatures, ready to blow it apart at even a single twitch. 2 of them still breathing, growing softly through the panting gasps. The 3rd one had sprawled lifelessly next to Joseph's mutilated body. "They should be dead, should have stayed down at the first shot. What are they?" Wesker took a single step toward the slaughter in front of them when suddenly, "Oh!" Low and deep howls echoed at the warm night air. Comes from all directions, shrill voices of predatorial fury coming at... Oh, fury. Predatorial fury coming at stars all together. "Back to the helicopter, now!" Wesker shouted. Chris ran, Barry and Jill in front of him and Wesker, bringing up the rear. The 4 of them sprinted through the dark trees, unseen branches slapping at them, and the howl grew louder. The howl grew louder, more inconsistent. So I give Joseph a gerb. Predatorial fur. Yeah, I know. My like. It happens sometimes when I'm reading. Like my brain will say, like, I'll read one thing and then I'll go back and read it. And I'm like, wait, that's not what that word was. What the heck? And it was just like, oh, that would. I feel like that'd be more scary than the dogs. Anyway, Wesker was like, wait, those aren't supposed to be at the mansion yet. Oh my god. I feel like there's gonna be a bunch of really cool, like, really funny, like, little things like that from this read. I'm gonna have to, I think, like, later, I'm gonna go through all this, and I'm gonna, like, cut all the different, like, funny, like, words and stuff like that, or, like, mistranslations and things, and just, like, stitch them all together into, like, a short... Oh shit, another one. Oh wait, it's just Barry. Back to the helicopter now! Wesker shouted. Chris ran, Barry and Jill in front of him, and Wesker bringing up the rear. The four of them sprinted through the dark trees, unseen branches slapping at them as the howl grew louder, more insistent. Wesker turned and fired blindly into the woods, running while stumbling towards the waiting helicopter. Its blades had spun. Chris felt relief sweep through him. Brad must have heard the shots. They still had a chance. He could hear the creatures behind them, the sharp rustling of lean, muscular bodies tearing through the trees. He could also see Brad's pale, wide-eyed face through the glass front of the helicopter, the reflected lights of the control panel casting a greenish glow across his panicked features. He was shouting something, but the roar of the engine covered everything, a blast of wind churning the field into a rippling sea. Another 50 feet, almost there. Then the helicopter somewhat jerked into the air, accelerating wildly. Chris caught a final glimpse of Brad's face and saw the blind terror on it, the unthinking panic that had gripped him as he clawed at the controls. "No, don't go!" Chris screamed, but the wobbling rails were already out of reach, the helicopter pitching forward and away from the throe of the thundering darkness. They were going to die. Damn you, Vickers! Wesker turned and fired again, rewarded with a squeal of pain from one of their pursuers. There was at least four more behind, gaining on them rapidly. "Keep going," he shouted, trying to get his bearings as they stumbled on, the piercing shrieks of the mutant dogs urging them faster. The sound of the helicopter was dying away, the cowardly Vickers taking their escape with him. Wesker fired again, the shot going wide, and saw another shadowy form join the hunt. The dogs were brutally fast, and they would stand a chance, unless... The mansion! "Veer right, 1 o'clock," Wesker yelled, hoping that his sense of direction was still intact. They couldn't outrun the creatures, but maybe they could keep them at bay long enough to reach that place. He spun and fired, and the last in his clip. Empty! Ejecting the spent magazine, he fumbled for another one tucked into his belt as both Barry and Chris took up the defense, firing past him and into the closing pack. Wesker slapped in the fresh clip as they reached the edge of the overgrown clearing and plunged into another dark stand of trees. They stumbled and dodged through the woods, tripping on an uneven ground as the killer dogs came on. Lungs aching for air, Wesker imagined that he could smell the... I'm just going to say putrid, rotting meat stench of the beast as they narrowed the distance and somehow found the capacity to run faster. "We should arrive by now. Gotta be Chris saw it first through the thinning shadows of the trees, the looming monstrosity backlit by an early moon. "There! Run for the house!" It looked as abandoned from the outside, the weathered wood and stone of the giant mansion crumbling and dark, the full size of the structure cloaked by the shadow of overgrown hedges that surrounded it, isolating it from the rest of the forest. A massive outset front porch presented double door, their only option for escape. Wesker heard the snap of powerful jaws behind him and fired at the sound, intuitively squeezing the trigger as he ran for the front of the mansion. A gurgling yelp and the creature fell away, the howls of its siblings louder than ever, raised to a fever pitch by the thrill of the chase. Jill reached the door first, slamming into the heavy wood with one shoulder as she snatched the handles. Amazingly, they crashed open. Brightness spilled out across the stone steps of the porch, lighting their path. She turned and started firing, providing more cover while the three grasping men ran for the opening in the darkness. They piled into the mansion, Jill driving in the last, and Barry dashed at the door, wedging it closed against the snarls of the creatures. He collapsed against it, face red and sweating, as Chris found the entry's steel deadbolt and slid it home. They made it. Outside, the dogs howled and scrabbled uselessly at the heavy doors. Wesker took a deep breath of the cool, quiet air that filled the well-lit room, and exhaled sharply. He had known from the beginning that the Spencer mansion wasn't abandoned, and now that they were here, all of his careful planning was for nothing. Wesker silently cursed Brad Vickers, wondering if they were any better off inside than out. Resident Evil. Bum, bum, bum. There you go, there's the start of the game. Now we are officially in the game. Instead of Resident Evil, they should have put like the I can't remember what the phrase is that it says like right before you start the game, where it's like the black screen and you see the white text at the bottom and it's like you know, this is my escape or whatever, like it says in RE3, but it's like whatever the RE1 thing is. They should have said that there instead. I feel like it would have been cooler. Alright, let's read some comments. "No, don't go" is canon. That's cool. Main hall time. Yes, it is. I unfortunately have to pee again, so I will be right back. I've been drinking too much water. Because, like, when I'm reading like this, my throat gets so dry, I have to, like, keep drinking water. Enter the Survival Horror, that's what it is. Yeah, they should have put Enter the Survival Horror right before the end of the chapter, and I think it would have been way cooler than just Resident Evil. But no, I'm drinking all this water to, like, make sure my throat doesn't get too dry and, like, raspy. And then, like, I'm ending up having to pee a bunch. I'll be right back. We are back. It's only me, Chris, Wesker, and Barry now. We don't know where Trent is. Trent was just the guy in the room. He is never there. I forgot that's the line for Ari Rebirth. Oh, okay. Ready? Alright, let's get back to it. Chapter 6, Chapter 5. Taking a look at their new surrounding, Jill felt like she was a character in a nightmare that had taken a turn into a grand fantasy. Wild howling monsters, Joseph's death, a terrifying run through the dark woods, and now this? Deserted, huh? It was a palace, pure and simple. What her father would have called a perfect score. The room was the epitome of lavish. It was huge, easily bigger than Jill's entire house. Tile and gray feckled marble and dominated by a wide carpeted staircase that led to a second floor balcony. Arched marble pillars lined the ornate hall, supporting the dark, dense wood balustrade of the upper floor. Fluted wall scones cast funnels of light across the walls of cream, trimmed in oak and offset by the deep burnt of the carpeting. In short, it was magnificent. "What is this?" Barry muttered, and no one answered him. Jill took a deep breath and decided that she didn't like it. There was a sense of faulty to the last room, an atmosphere of vague oppression. It felt haunted somehow, though by who or what she couldn't make it. Better than got eaten by mutant dogs, I guess, Jill thought. Poor Joseph. We haven't got a chance to mourn him. She walked towards the stairs, clutching the handgun, her footsteps muffled by the plush carpet that led from the front door. There was an antique typewriter on a small table to the right of the steps, a blank sheet of paper spooled into the works. Peculiar bit of decency. The expansive hall was otherwise empty. She faced the others, wondering what their idea on all this was. Barry and Chris looked uncertain. The flushed, sweaty faces glanced around the room. Wesker crouched by the front door, examining one of the latches. Then he stood up, his dark shade still in place, seemingly as detached as ever. "The wood around the lock is splintered. Somebody broke this door before we got here." Chris looked hopeful. "Maybe the Bravos?" Wesker nodded. "That's what I'm thinking. Maybe help should be on the way, assuming our friend, Mr. Vickers, bothers to call them." His voice dripped sarcasm, and Jill felt her anger kindling. Brad had screwed up big time, almost cost them their lives. There was no excuse for his action. Wesker continued, walking across the room and toward one of the two doors on the west wall. He rattled the handle, but it didn't open. "It's not safe to go outside. Until the cavalry shows up, we might as well take a look around. It's obvious that somebody's been keeping the place up, though why and for how long." He trailed off, walking back towards the group. "How's your ammo?" Jill ejected the clip from her Beretta and counted. 3 rounds left, plus the 2 loaded in the magazines on her belt. That'll make 33 rounds left. Chris had 22, Wesker 17. Barry had 2 rack speed loaders for his Colt, plus an extra handful of loose cartridges tucked into a hip pouch. 19 rounds in all. Jill thought about all they had left back on the helicopter and felt another rush of anger towards Brad. Boxes of ammunition, flashlights, walkie-talkies, shotguns, and medical supplies. That Beretta that Joseph had found in the field. The place, blood-splattered fingers still wrapped around it. A STARS team member, dead or dying. And thanks to Brad, they didn't even have a band-aid to offer. Thud. A sound of something big sliding onto the floor somewhere near. In unison, they all turned toward the single door on the east wall. Jill suddenly, as if recalled every horror movie she had ever watched. A strange house and noise. All of it made her shiver. Jill decided at this moment that she would kick Brad's sorry ass when they get out of here. "Chris, check it out and report back ASAP," Wesker said. "We'll wait here for help. You run into any trouble, fire your weapon and we'll rush immediately." Chris nodded and walked towards the door. His boots clacked loudly against the marble floor. Jill felt a sense of foreboding wash over her. "Chris?" His hand readied on the knob. She looks at her with... His hand readied on the knob, looks at her with inquiry eyes. She realized there was nothing she could tell him that made any sense. Everything happened so fast, so much wrong with the situation that she didn't even know where to begin. Besides, Chris was a skilled professional, and so was she. "Come on, act like one already." "Take care," she said finally. It wasn't what she wanted to say, but it would have been enough. Chris gave her a lopsided grin, then raised his Beretta and stepped through the doorway. Jill heard the ticking of a clock right before Chris closed the door behind him. Barry caught her gaze and smiled at her, a look that told her not to worry, but Jill couldn't shake the feeling of certainty that Chris wouldn't come back. Chris swept the room, taking in the stately elegance of the environment as he realized he was not alone. Whoever had made the noise, they weren't here. A solemn ticking of antique clock filled the cold air, echoing the shining black and white tiles. He was in the dining hall, the kind he had only seen in movies about rich people. Like the front room, this one had an incredibly high ceiling and a second-floor balcony, but it also decorated with expensive-looking art and inset fireplace at the far end, complete with a coat of arms and crossed swords hung over the mantel. There doesn't seem to be a way to climb onto the second floor, but he saw a door on the right side of the fireplace. Chris lowered his weapon and stepped for the door, still awed by the wealth of the abandoned mansion that Stars had stumbled. The dining room had polished red wood trim and expensive-looking artwork on the beige stucco walls, surrounding long wooden table that ran the length of the room. The table had to seat at least 20, though it only set for a handful of people. From the dust on the lacy placemats, nothing had been serving for weeks, except no one is supposed to have been here for 30 years, let alone hosted a formal dinner. Spencer had shut the mansion down before anyone could live here. Chris shook his head. Obviously, someone had reopened the mansion a long time ago. So how is it that everyone in Raccoon City believed the Spencer mansion to be boarded up, a crumbling ruin, out in the woods? More importantly, why Umbrella lied to Irons about its condition? Murders, disappearances, Umbrella, Jill. It was frustrating. He felt like he had some answers, but wasn't exactly sure about it. Chris reached the door and turned the knob slowly, listening for any sound of movement on the other side. He couldn't hear anything over the ticking of the old clock. It set against the wall, and each movement in the second hand reverberated hollowly, amplified by the cavernous room. The door opened into one side of a narrow corridor, dimly lit by an antique light fixture. Chris checked both directions. To the right, maybe a 10 meters of hardwood hall, a couple doors across from him, and a door at the end of the corridor. To the left, the hallway took a sharp turn away from where he stood, widening out. He saw the edge of a patterned brown run of the floor there. He wrinkled his nose, frowning. There was a vague odor in the air, a faint scent of something unpleasant, also familiar. He stood in the doorway for another moment, trying to recall the smell. It was summer, back when he was still a toddler. The chain of his bike had come off, and he ended up in a ditch about 6 inches away from a choice bit of roadkill and found dried-up, pulpy remains of what once might have been a woodchuck. Time in the summer heat had dissipated most of the smell, though what had remained was grave enough. Much to the amusement of his friends, he had vomited his lunch all over the carcass, taken a deep breath, and then puked again. He still remembered the sun-baked scent of drying rot, like thickly soured milk and bile. The same smell that lingered in the corridor now feels like a bad dream. Foomp. A soft shuffling noise from behind the first door to his right, like a padded fist sliding against the wall. There was someone on the other side. Chris edged into the hallway and moved towards the door, careful not to turn his back to the unsecured area. As he got closer, the gentle sounds of movement stopped, and he could see the door at it closed all the way. No time like the present. With an easy tap, the door swung inward into a dim hall of green feckled wallpaper. A broad-shouldered man was standing 20 feet away, half hidden in shadow, his back to Chris. He turned around slowly, the careful shuffling of someone drunk or injured, and the smell that Chris noticed before came from this man's thick and noxious waves. His clothes were tattered and stained, and the back of his head patchy with sparse, scraggly hair. Maybe he was sick, or perhaps dying. Whatever was wrong with him, Chris didn't like it. His instincts were screaming at him to do something. He stepped onto the corridor and trained his Beretta on the man's torso. "Hold it, don't move." The man completed his turn and lumbered at Chris, shambling toward the light. Its face was deathly pale, except for the blood around its rotting lips. Flaps of dried skin hung from its sunken cheeks, and the dark wells of the creature's eye sockets glittered with hunger as it reached out with skeletal hands. Chris fired 3 shots that smacked into the creature's upper chest in a fine spray of crimson. With a gasping moan, it crumpled to the floor dead. He staggered back, his thoughts racing in time with his hammering heart. He hit the door with one shoulder, was vaguely aware that it was latched closed behind him, as he stared at the fallen, stinking heap. That thing's the walking goddamn dead. The cannibal attacks in Raccoon, all of them near the forest. He had seen enough late movies to know what he was looking at, but he still couldn't believe it. Zombies. No way, that was fiction. Maybe some kind of disease mimicking the symptoms? He had to tell the others. Chris turned and grabbed the handle, but the heavy door wouldn't move. It must have been locked when we hit it before. Behind him, a wet movement. Chris spun, eyes wide, as the twitching creature clawed at the wooden floor, pulling itself toward him in eager, single-minded silence. He realized that the creature was drooling, and the sight of the sticky pink pooling into the wood floor finally spurred him into action. He fired again, 2 shots into the thing's decaying, upturned face. Dark holes opened up its knobby skull, sending tiny rivers of fluid and fleshy tissue into its lower jaw. With a heavy sigh, the rotting thing settled to the floor in a spreading red lake. Chris didn't want to make any bets on it staying down. He gave one more futile yank on the door before he stepped carefully past the body, moving down the corridor. He rattled the handle of the door on his left, but it was locked. There was a tiny etching in the key place, what looked like a sword. He filed that bit of information into his confused, whirling thoughts and continued gripping at the Beretta tightly. There was an offshoot to his right with a single door, but he ignored it, wanting to find a way to circle back to the front hall. The others must have heard the shots, but he had to assume more creatures were running around here like the one he had killed. The rest of the team might have their hands full. There was a door at the end of the hall on the left, where the corridor turned. Chris hurried towards it, the future son of the creature, the zombie, whatever they are, making him want to gag. One second, sorry, I had a hair in my mouth. Chris drew close to the door, but he realized the smell was getting worse, intensifying with each step. He heard the soft, hungry moan as he touched the knob, even as it registered that he only had 2 bullets left in his clip. In the shadows to his right, there was a movement. Must reload and get somewhere safe. Chris jerked open the door and stepped inside in the arms of the shambling creature that waited on the other side, its peeling fingers grasping at him as it lunged for his throat. 3 shots. Seconds later, 2 more. The sounds are distant but distinct in the lobby. Chris. Jill, why don't you? Wesker said, but Barry didn't let him finish. I'm going too, he said, proceeding for the door on the east wall. Chris wouldn't waste shots like that unless he had to. He needs help. Wesker nodded. Go, I'll wait here. Barry opened the door, Jill followed, and they walked into a huge dining room, not as wide as the front hall, but at least as long. There was another door at the opposite end, past an antique clock that ticked loudly in the frigid, dusty air. Barry jogged towards the door, revolver in hand, feeling tense and worried. What a balls up this operation was. STAR's teams were often sent into risky situations with unusual circumstances, but this was the first time since he had been a rookie that Barry felt like things had gone out of control. Joseph was dead, chicken-hearted Vickers left them to be eaten by dogs from hell, and now Chris was in trouble. Wesker shouldn't have sent him alone. Jill reached the door first, touching the handle with slim fingers and looking at him. Barry nodded as she pushed it open, going in low and left. Barry took the other side, both of them sweeping an empty corridor. Chris? Jill said quietly, but got no response. Barry scowled, sniffing the air. Smells like rotting fruit. I'll check the doors, Barry said. Jill nodded and edged to the left, alert and focused. Barry moved towards the first door, feeling good that Jill was at his back. He had thought she was kind of bitchy when she first transferred, but she was proving to be a bright and capable soldier, a welcome addition to the Alphas. Jill let out a high-pitched gasp of surprise, and Barry spun, the scent of decay suddenly thick in the narrow hall. She was backing away from an opening at the end of the corridor, her weapon trained on something Barry couldn't see. Stop! Her voice was high and shaky, her expression horrified. Then she fired once, twice, still backing towards Barry, her breathing fast and shallow. Get clear, left! He raised the Colt as she moved out of the way. As the tall man stepped into view, the figure's arms were stretched out like a sleepwalker's, the hands frail and grasping. Barry saw the creature's face, and he shot him without hesitation. The .357 round peeled the top of its ashen skull away in an explosive burst, blood coursing down its strange, terrible features and staining the cataracts of its pale, rolling eyes. It pitched back, sprawling face up at Jill's feet. Barry hurried to her side, stunned. What? He said before his eyes caught something on the carpet in front of them, laying in the small sitting area that marked the end of the corridor. For a moment, Barry thought it was Chris. Then she saw the Stars Bravo insignia on the vest and felt a different kind of horror set in as he struggled to recognize the features. The Bravo had lost his head. It rested a foot away from the corpse, the face completely covered in gore. Oh, damn, it's Ken. Kenneth Sullivan, one of the best field scouts Barry had ever known, and a hell of a nice guy. There was a gaping, raged wound in his chest, chunks of partly eaten tissue and gut strewn across the bloody hole. His left hand was missing, and there was no weapon nearby. It must have been his gun that Joseph found out in the woods. Barry looked away, sickened. Ken had been a quiet, decent sort, did a lot of work in chemistry. He would have a teenage son who would live with his ex in California. Barry thought of his girls at home, Moira and Polly, and felt a surge of helpless fear for them. He wasn't afraid of death, but he thought of them growing up without a father. Jill dropped into a crouch next to his ravaged body and rifled quickly through the belt pack. She shot an apologetic look at Barry, but he gave her a slight nod. They needed the ammo. Ken certainly didn't. She came up with 2 clips for a 9mm and tucked them into her hip pocket. Barry turned and stared down Ken's killer in disgust and wonder. No doubt he was looking at one of the cannibal killers that haunted Raccoon City. It had a crusty scum of red around its mouth and gore-encrusted nails, as well as ragged shirt that was stiff with dried blood. What was weird was how dead it looked. Barry had once done a covert hostage rescue in Ecuador, where a group of farmers had been held for weeks by a band of insane guerrilla rebels. Several of the hostages had been killed early in the siege, and after Stars managed to capture the rebels, Barry had gone with one of the survivors to record the deaths. The 4 victims had been shot, their bodies dumped behind the small wooden shack that the rebels had taken over. After 3 weeks in the South American sun, the skin on their faces had shriveled, the cracking, lined flesh pulling away from the sinew and bone. He still remembered those faces clearly when he saw them again, and now down at the fallen creature. It wore the face of death. Besides which, it smells like a slaughterhouse on a hot day. Somebody forgot to tell this guy that dead people don't walk around. He could see the same sickened confusion on Jill's face, the same questions in her eyes, but for now there weren't any answers. They had to find Chris and regroup. Together they moved back down the corridor and checked all 3 doors, rattling handles and pushing at the heavy wooden frames. All securely locked, but Chris had to have gone through one of them. There's nowhere else he could have gone. It didn't make any sense. In the short breaking the doors down, there was nothing they could do about it. We should report back to Wesker, Jill said. Oh, I thought that was, for a second there, I thought it was going to be Barry the one saying that, so I tried to say it like Barry. We should go back to report to Wesker, Jill said, and Barry nodded in agreement. If they would go into the hiding place of the killers, they were going to need a plan of attack. They ran back through the dining room, the stale air of relief after the corridor's reek of blood and decay. Reaching for the door back to the main hall, they went past through it as Barry wondered what the captain would make of all this. It was downright... Barry stopped, searching for the elegant, empty hall and feeling like the butt of some practical joke that simply wasn't funny. Wesker was gone. What? What do you mean new chapters coming soon? I thought this was the whole book. Okay, well, I apologize, guys. See, this is why I don't use online libraries. Yeah, I'm just gonna buy the book. I'm sorry, guys. Let's see, what time is it? It's like 8. Well, I guess I'll read some comments. The original is, they escaped in the mansion where they thought it was safe. Oh, interesting, 263. Barry's first thought was, what is this? Jill being a part of Chris's frustration is funny. So in conclusion, Kenneth ate Chris. He tried to. I feel like he tried to. Alright, so we're... This is chapter 6. Alright. So I gotta pull this up somewhere else. Well, it's gonna take me a little while to get to go buy the book and all that stuff. So like, I think I might have to end the stream for this tonight. I'm sorry, guys. Well, I do plan on, when I finish reading this, I'm gonna like stitch all the parts together into like one video, so you can just like listen to the whole book. But I think this is where we're gonna have to stop part 1. So I'm sorry, you guys. I'm really sorry. I didn't know this was gonna end. I'm gonna write a review. I'm gonna write one. I was like, you're ridiculous. I can't believe this isn't the whole thing. I want to at least see what the comment is. I'm begging you to write what happened next, please. It's so good. That's great. Alright, so this has never got completed. Got it. Okay. Yeah, I'll just buy the book. It's like $10. I'll get it. Alright. I actually really enjoyed that last bit. Yeah, I'm telling you, these books are so good. Like, you thought playing the game was fun. Wait till you read it. It's really cool. You guys are gonna get to see later too when we actually encounter some of like the BOWs and stuff. It's gonna be real creepy. Alright, well, let's do this. Well, hope you guys had a lot of fun and enjoyed that little bit of a different stream. I didn't plan for it to be that short, if I'm being honest. I was gonna go till like 9 or something like that, so it'd be like another hour of reading. But I feel like that's a good end point though too. So like I can't even be mad about that. Like Wesker was gone, and then like, you know, because that's when the game like actually starts. You know, like you have the beginning part, but that's like almost like a tutorial of just like how to navigate the mansion, how to kill something, like you know, stuff like that. So this is where it gets really interesting. Yeah, you guys got definitely something good to look forward to. So I'm probably gonna change the name of this to like intro or part 1 or something. It was a good endpoint. You're right. We're in game territory now. Yeah, because at this point you're playing and you'd go do something. So we get to see what order they did the stuff in, like in this book's story. So yeah, it's gonna be just exciting when we get back. That's great. And it'll be nice to read the actual book too, not this like really rough translation of it. I don't remember what it was. There was one part in here that I read a little bit ago, and I was trying so hard not to laugh at how bad it was spelled. Let me see if I can find it. It was try and see if I could see this. It was at the end of a sentence. It was at like the end of a little paragraph too. I can't find it. I don't want to spend too long looking for this. I'll try and look it up later. But there was just a certain part in here that was just it was just so funny. Yeah, alright, I give up. It was funny though. it was, I'm telling you. Considering how many people stopped playing after the first Zombie 2 is as far as some of them got. That's wild. That makes me want to go on Steam now and look at like how many people got to like the first like the first boss or something like that, you know? Yeah. Yeah. I had a lot of fun doing this as well. It was really cool like doing something different for you guys. It was like pretty interesting. I'm very curious on how you guys like if you guys don't mind actually, if you like after this video like publishes, you should comment on what your favorite part was. And that's a good idea. Because, like, my favorite part, honestly, was the fact that I had, like, the thunderstorm sound with the piano in the background, like, as I'm reading. So, like, it feels like it feels like a rainy day where you're stuck inside and you're just, like, reading a good book, you know? That was my, like, thing. That was my whole thing I was going for. Barry being buddies with Enrico is interesting. Us red vest guys gotta stick together. I enjoyed this precursor to true terror. The rain is awesome. It was like the actual ambiance of the Spencer Mansion. That's what I was going for. I was trying to get like a, you know, like I already explained, like a rainy day with a good book. So like, I'm glad it hit the way it was supposed to. I'm actually gonna probably after I finish this series, I think I'm gonna listen back through it because when I'm reading it, I'm not like taking it in as much as I would be if I was just like if I wasn't reading it aloud, you know. I'm not instead of having like a movie in my head that I'm reading, I'm like just like I don't know. I have to think of better terminology before I describe this, but yeah. Anytime thunder struck, I saw the lightning flash in my mind's eye through the windows and stuff. Good. That's exactly what it was supposed to be. I worked really hard on that stuff. Getting that all set up. So I'm glad you guys liked it. Yeah, well, if you're not in the Discord, I highly recommend you check it out. We do an after show after every stream. We do all kinds of fun stuff in there. I highly recommend you check it out. Link is in the video description and on my page. Oh, thank you for the hearts. I love you guys too. So also, I am curious on how you guys feel about this, like, about the reading thing, taking up a Wednesday slot. Because I know normally we would play, like, one of the suggested games on a Wednesday, but I was feeling almost kind of burnt out on like a video game, and I'm like, there's so many other ways I can entertain people, like, so I'm thinking about experimenting doing some more of these readings, because it was really fun for me to do personally. I really enjoy reading. It's one of my favorite things to do. So I'd be interested in going and, like, doing a little bit more with, like, the reading stuff with you guys, or, like, exploring some other avenues for content. Yeah, so I might start experimenting with some other streams or something. I don't know. Tuesday's always gonna be Resident Evil though. Don't worry. That's a must. But yeah, I'd be interested to know your guys' ideas and stuff like that for, like, how you, or not ideas, but, like, your thoughts on how you feel about this versus the usual games. So, I'm gonna take my good night. I like it personally. Ari's stuff is always cool. I agree completely. It is the whole reason I made the channel, just because I enjoyed Resident Evil so much, so. Well, I think that's about all I have to say for tonight, so I will bid you guys farewell. I hope you all have a wonderful week and an even better weekend, and I'll see you guys Tuesday with RE6. Have a good night. Bye-bye.